Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are in the world. This is Howie, and I'm here to help you win with money. In this week's episode of Exposed by Math, I have something really exciting. When is debt good? This is probably going to be a very controversial Exposed by Math, but stay tuned and find out when. So let's start off with the concept. What is debt? Debt is the borrowing of money at a cost. Really simple. Whenever you borrow money from somebody, generally speaking, there's an interest rate. There are a few times in life where you can borrow for zero. You can borrow from a cousin or a friend or your mom or dad, and they generally don't charge you interest. Or you can get a 0% credit card transfer, and you can borrow money that way. But the rest of the time, there's an interest rate on it. And for most of us, we understand this. You got a car loan, student loan, credit cards, mortgage. But the concept of borrowing, it's been around for a long time. And is it a good thing or a bad thing? And that's really the question here. If you borrow money to go to college, and if you get a job that actually paid more money than if you never went to college, could that be a good thing? The reverse is true. What if you go to college to become a doctor, you graduate, and you become just somebody who ends up working a real retail job? And that happens a lot. So now you got $100,000 of student loans, and you got a job that doesn't pay you for what you specialize in college. So that could be a bad thing. And the same goes with almost anything. You can borrow money for a lot of different things. Doesn't mean it's going to be a good investment. And that's what we're going to look at today. Most of you understand and know who Dave Ramsey is. He teaches that debt is bad. Cash is king, and you hear that all the time. But is he always right? And that's what we want to look at today. Is he just sometimes right? Or is it always right? And that's what we want to look at. And is it a wrong teaching? And I'll give you an example. If you're saving $4,000 a year, how long will it take you to buy a house in cash? Well, the answer may be never. You'll never get there. As in, not in never as in you can buy a house today. It's you may never get there. Because every year as you're saving, if the value of the house appreciates, even at a constant rate, you will never catch up. And so there's a problem with that. And we all understand that. So obviously, Dave Ramsey allows people to get a mortgage. But then let's lower the price point. What about a car? You want to buy a $30,000 car. And if you're saving the same $4,000, 8 years will only bring you to $28,000. Now, if you have interest, maybe you can get it a little bit sooner. Suppose I need to buy a new minivan. I really need one. Some of you who see my car see it. It's a little bit old, 10 years old. I hadn't had a car payment in that thing in, I don't remember now, 4, 5 years maybe. What's the right way to get this car? Well, I can walk into the dealership, put $5,000 down, get a loan for about maybe $800, maybe $900 a month for 72 months. You punch it up at maybe 6-7% interest rate, depending, maybe 6,000, maybe 7,000, depending on how you look at this and what loan you can get. Sometimes you get really cheap car loans for like 5 or 6%. Sometimes I've seen as low as 0%, but I don't think those are very common nowadays. But that's one way to do it. And for most people, this is your only option because that's how you do it, right? Most people don't have $50,000 sitting around doing nothing. So if that's true, if you have no money, then of course this method is really not the smartest method. Because what you're saying is, not only do I have no money, I'm going to borrow $50,000 and I'm going to go into debt or further into debt and accumulate an asset that's going to drop in value and pay interest on top of that. So this $50,000 car is costing you $56,000, but by the time you pay it off, it's only worth $12,000. Does that make sense? So that's how the math works. And for 80% of people, this is the normal method they use. But not everybody uses this particular method. And what I mean by that is, let me show you the next one. there's a smaller percentage of the population who actually saves money, and then they have money to pay this thing down in cash. They're going to walk into the dealership and say, yep, that's the car I want, and here's the $50,000 paid in full. Boom, we're done. And the only impact is your net worth drops only $50,000 today. But if you still got income, whatever you would have been paying in payments, this $800 or $900 a month, now you're adding that back into your net worth. And if you do the math, it only takes a few years, maybe 4 years or 5 years, to replenish this $50,000. But what's the other option? What can you do with the $45,000 in cash? What if you had the money and still went with the loan? And that becomes the third option. Now, this option is not available to everybody. And again, I set that up in a way where most of us don't have money to buy a car, so that's why you're using a loan. But if you're in this option, if you have the $50,000 cash, is that really the smartest way for you to go? And can you make the cash make money for you? So that's what we're going to look at. And here's a scenario. Instead of putting the $50,000 into the car, as what I said here, what if you still use the same $5,000 for a down payment, so you still have $45,000? What that leaves you with is this much. What if you store that under your mattress or a cookie jar, or you freeze it in your freezer, or whatever method you have? Some people still want to bury it under their backyard. You earn a whopping 0% on your money. And what's the real gain? The net difference of that is you lose about 2% a year on your money. And if the car loan is about a 6% interest rate, you can see this is really not a good option. That $45,000 in cash is doing you no good. What if you left it in the bank? I was really generous here. I assume the bank is paying you 1%. We know that's not true, but if it is, what's the real gain? It's a minus value. What if you bought a T-bill? We all know treasuries are rising in the last year. But that's only 2%. And that's still being generous. I think it's 1.6 today for a 10-year treasury bill. You're still losing 6% of your money. So that's a bad thing. What if you bought a dividend stock? And here I'm just using the actual dividend only. I'm not counting the underlying. So you're still losing 5%. And now it gets a little bit harder. Real estate is a little bit trickier to compute. I'm just using some assumptions. If you bought a real estate property, you funnel all your cash into it, it is possible for you to be positive, or you can be cash flow negative, depending on how much rent covers the mortgage and how much is the free cash flow on that particular property. There's a lot of other factors in here. But here, I'm going to assume it is possible to have a positive ROI and a positive real gain. But again, for this video's argument's sake, I'm just going to leave it as a mystery, and it could be anything. Now let's go to the stock market. The historical average is generally over 10%, but for this video's purpose, I'm just going to assume it's 9, depending on which study you read and how inflation impacts it. So anyway, I use this assumption. I use a 9, so your real gain is a positive gain, because I'm still counting the 6% with the 2% inflation. So your net difference is your money is still making more money for you. So you're not losing money in this scenario. And then I went into these last two. And I wanted to show that investors are business owners. If you funnel that money in a business where your business is generating more money than, right, more a real rate of return, and this one is using an example of 10%, that means your real gain is 2%. Or if you have an investor who's making 50%. And so the question is that possible? If you don't think it's possible, I think you need to watch some of my videos. I make 2% in 2 days sometimes doing a short-term options trade. Now, I don't advertise it as you can do this every day for the rest of your life, because I don't think that is a true statement. But is it possible to make 2% on a trade? Absolutely. In fact, if you set the bar much lower, if you set the bar to like 2% a day, right, or 1% a week, it is very possible to pull out numbers even greater than this. And this is where an investor thinks very different from a typical person. Will I be using all cash to buy my next car? I think you know where I'm going with this. I consider myself in this group where I don't think I will. I've been debt free and I have cash. But will I still want to use all my cash to buy something and pay it in full? And that's really the question you need to ask yourself. Am I bashing people who have a lot of cash, or am I bashing people who are debt free? Absolutely not. I wish there were more people who are debt free or have a better control of how to manage their finances. And for a bonus slide, I'm going to show you something that I talk about in my other forums, this concept of leveling up your thinking. I'm not going to go into full details in this next slide. In this video, you need to catch the level 102 or 201 video on how to use debt. But here's the slide. In theory, I'm just going to go over this real quick. Most people are in this category. They're in debt, they have a negative cash worth. Most of us, or a lot of population, spend their whole lifetime getting out of debt. You got a mortgage. By the time you're 60, maybe you're debt free for the first time in your life. That's most of the middle class, unfortunately. Because by the time they have kids, 18 years later, you put them through college, the kid is like 22 years old now, and then you're still paying for his college education. So you may not get out of debt until you're 60, right around the time your house may be nearly paid off. Now, there are a small group of people who are totally debt free. I'll give you the thumbs up. The cool thing is, I'm in that group. I've been totally debt free, and I know what it's like. Is it a bad thing? Absolutely not. Can you grow your wealth faster? Absolutely. But now the last group is the one where I think, and there's some debate on this, the last group I think is using debt wisely. And I actually rank this group higher than this group. The reason why is if you learn how to properly manage your finances, you can do that at 24 years old, even if you have $50,000 in debt. And by the time you're 35 years old, if you still have debt, that's okay because your net worth is growing. There are many people who I know, they have debt, but they have a positive net worth. I'll give you an example. Have you ever met a real estate investor who has 4 or 5 or 6 or 8 properties? The guy may tell you, hey man, I'm up to debt in my eyeballs. The guy will tell you he has $2 million in mortgage debt. And you may say, ooh, that's so bad. What the guy didn't tell you is his net worth is probably $1 million. And he doesn't have to be 60 years old to hit that number. He can be 35 or 40 years old. Yes, he has a lot of debt, but if you subtract all the debt minus from his property values, he has a positive net worth. If you do it wisely, you can actually attain a higher net worth even at a younger age. And so this concept of using money wisely is really important. And this is why I believe if you teach people how to think about how to handle their money, even with the cost of borrowing, there are ways for you to still grow your net worth. You don't need to be debt free to have a positive net worth. Now, if you want to go and do it the Dave Ramsey way, there's nothing wrong with that. You can spend your lifetime not accumulating debt, paying cash for everything, nothing wrong with it, right? The way I always view it is if that's the only way that you can think and work, that's fine. Like I said, I don't have anything bad to say about it. I was in that group. But today, I believe that even if I have the cash, and I do have the cash, I don't think I want to give it up. I'm going to use that cash to constantly produce more money for me. I want this uninterrupted compounding interest with everything that I do. My dividends do that. I've been collecting dividends for 25 years. I started literally the year I graduated college, bought my first dividend stock pretty early on, and it's been uninterrupted dividend compounding growth every year. It's been wonderful. And in doing this concept of leveling up, there are ways for you to use debt wisely and to build your net worth. I do want to caveat this with saying this level 1 or 2 does not mean just add more debt just to buy a pair of shoes or a purse or a fancy car. If you don't have money to pay for it, there is that concept of adding more debt. It's not how you build wealth. What I'm talking about is if you're using debt to add an asset that can generate money for you, that's how you can build wealth. You have to buy an asset that makes more money. So, in the end, what I want to remind people is no matter what, there is a cost of borrowing money. Debt, there is always a cost. The only way you can use debt that would be good is if the debt actually provides some type of real value, either that increases your earning power or you buy an asset that generates some type of income or increases in value. So that's just common sense. You didn't need me to tell you that. But when you look at the math, there are some things that just make more sense than others. And this is how a good investor needs to measure and monitor their risk. When done properly, you can increase your net worth over time because you're learning how to manage the risk. With that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this. Please give me a thumbs up. Like all my other videos, my expose my math are always very controversial. I try to teach something, explain the math, show you why, give you the reasoning. And I know it doesn't make everyone happy, but we need to have that discussion and a dialogue. There is no one way or the highway. Life is not a you have to do it this way to be rich. That is a bogus mindset. You see it all the time in the financial industry. Everybody thinks their way is the only way, and that is so wrong. We need to teach this concept of let's understand why people teach what they teach and have a perspective of understanding it. But let's do this together. Let's do this $1 at a time. And as always, have a profitable day. Bye bye.